The night was silent, too silent. The kind of silence that presses into your chest, that makes each breath feel heavy, and every movement sound louder than it is us. Soldiers patrolling the outskirts of Pripyat spoke of shadows that moved against the fog, fleeting shapes just beyond the reach of their flashlights, glimpses of something pale and wet, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. The swamp itself seemed alive, breathing, waiting, patient, as if it had been there long before them and would remain long after. They whispered of hands grabbing at their ankles, cold, clammy, insistent, pulling them downward into water that should have held nothing, yet somehow did. Some said they could hear faint singing, notes floating above the reeds, lilting, sorrowful, impossibly sweet, a voice calling their names, beckoning them closer, daring them to step further into the murky depths. Footsteps faltered, weapons shook in trembling hands, eyes darted into the blackness, and the logs recorded only one chilling phrase, fate unknown. Reports spoke of splashes, sudden ripples where no one should have been, of comrades disappearing between one breath and the next, leaving only echoes, echoes of panic, echoes of a struggle that no one could witness. One officer's memo, later declassified, described the scene in stark, uneasy language. Men reported sensations of being pulled, submerged, yet no bodies recovered. Circumstances unexplained. Fear threaded through every line, a fear that seeped into the ranks, that lingered in the fog, that haunted dreams long after the patrol ended. Legends whispered among locals gave a name to the terror. The Rusalka, a spirit of the drowned, of the forgotten, a figure that emerged from water under the pale moonlight, singing, beckoning, claiming. Tales told that once the Rusalka touched you, there was no escape, that the water itself became a trap, that eyes wide with terror might be the last sight a man ever had. Soldiers scoffed at such stories, until their own patrols proved otherwise, until the swamp seemed to answer in silence and shadow, until they felt themselves slipping into darkness and no one else could reach them. And so the night stretched on, each moment heavier than the last. Every distant splash, every ripple, every whisper of wind through reeds, carried with it the question that refused to leave their minds: what waits beneath the waters of Pripyat? And who will be next? It was the autumn of 1986, months after the catastrophic meltdown at Chernobyl, when the city of Pripyat lay abandoned, its streets empty, buildings crumbling. Yet the swamps surrounding it were strangely alive. Mist rose from stagnant waters, curling over sunken logs and tangled reeds, hiding channels that seemed to shift as if the marsh had memory. Soldiers of a border patrol unit entered this silent world, their boots sinking into mud that resisted their every step, their eyes scanning every shadow, every sound amplified. The swamp demanded vigilance, and it fed on distraction. The patrol was composed of men both young and experienced, some fresh recruits, others hardened in cold weather operations. Yet none had encountered a night like this. Flashlights cut arcs through the darkness, illuminating glimpses of movement, reeds quivering, water disturbed without visible cause, and the fog muffled distant sounds until the world felt small and suffocating. The air was thick, laden with the scent of decay, and the lingering radiation of a city left to die. Villagers from miles away had long whispered about the Rusalka, a spirit bound to the water, who lured the living with a song both beautiful and horrifying. Descriptions were vivid: long hair floating atop water like black reeds, skin pale as frost, eyes that glowed faintly in moonlight, and fingers reaching from below pulling victims into unseen depths. Soldiers tried to dismiss the stories, yet the swamp made believers of them. Every tug at an ankle, every inexplicable ripple, every soft splash against the hull of a boot seemed to echo the old legends. The terrain itself was a trap. Deceptive channels, sudden deep pockets, mud that sucked at boots, each step threatening to swallow a man whole. Fog clung to the surface of the swamp, bending perception, hiding dangers, and turning ordinary trees and reeds into ominous shifting shapes. Radios crackled intermittently. Sometimes voices returned, distorted, delayed, as though the swamp intercepted sound, twisted it, played it back to unsettle the living. By 2 a.m., fear had taken hold. Soldiers whispered of movement just beyond flashlight beams, pale shapes gliding across the water, figures vanishing before they could be confirmed. Echoes of splashes sounded where none should have occurred. From the mist came song, faint, haunting, rising and falling, drawing them closer, daring them to step further. Some men froze, others trembled. None could explain what they were seeing. The logs recorded a series of fragmented events, patrols hesitating, soldiers calling in strange sightings, reports of being grabbed, pulled, tugged by unseen forces, men falling into water without struggle and disappearing. A commanding officer's later declassified memo noted, "The area is unnerving. Men report sensations of being pulled. Disappearances are increasingly credible. Circumstances unexplained." The official language could not capture the terror, nor the slow, creeping doubt in the minds of the soldiers. Even the simplest gestures became perilous. Reaching for a rifle caused a shadow to stretch across the water, turning a hand into a threat. A step forward could lead to the mud sucking a man down. A sound in the distance could mask something far worse. The swamp demanded attention, punished hesitation, and seemed almost sentient. Men described it later as though the swamp watched them, judged them, and whispered threats from the shadows. Despite training and experience, their senses betrayed them. The fog obscured distance, distorted sound, and the water seemed to rise and fall with a mind of its own. Reflections shifted in unnatural ways. Shadows moved against the current of wind, and every ripple suggested another presence, another hand beneath the surface. Folk stories of the Rusalka were no longer merely tales. They became a lens through which reality was perceived, the line between legend and fact blurring with each moment. The patrol's movement slowed, cautious, deliberate. Each step measured, each glance scrutinized. Conversations became whispers, whispers became silence, and silence pressed on their minds, a suffocating weight that left imagination to wander, conjuring glimpses of the pale figure, long hair, floating eyes, glinting hands reaching and pulling. Even the bravest men found themselves imagining shapes where none existed, or perhaps where shapes had always existed, hidden by fog and darkness. By the first light of dawn, the swamp seemed to release its hold, the mist retreating, sounds returning to their natural order. Yet the fear lingered. Men recounted moments that defied explanation. Odd splashes, eerie songs, shadows that vanished when approached, and an overwhelming sense that something had watched, something had tested them. Something remained beneath the water, waiting. The city of Pripyat slept in ruin, but the swamps surrounding it whispered of secrets of the Rusalka and of men who entered at night and never quite returned the same. Official reports from that night tell a story of confusion and dread, of men vanishing where no one should vanish. Foot patrols were meticulously logged, every route, every checkpoint recorded. Yet by midnight, the records become fragmented, lines crossed out, notes scribbled hastily in fear. One entry reads, Private Ivanov reported tug at ankle. No body recovered. Fate unknown. Another mentions unexplained splashes in shallow channels, ripples moving against the wind, and the sensation of being watched from beneath the fog. Radios captured only static, sometimes faint cries, sometimes nothing at all. Declassified memos reveal conflicting accounts. One soldier claimed he saw a pale figure standing in the water, hair floating like reeds, hands reaching for him. Another insisted it was a trick of light fog and fear. Yet multiple men at different locations recorded nearly identical phenomena, shadows shifting unnaturally, water pulling at boots, strange sounds that could not be located. The commanding officer's notes convey unease, a rare admission of uncertainty, words chosen carefully. Reports of disappearance cannot be dismissed. Circumstances do not match known terrain hazards, men unsettled beyond reason. Medical records confirm trauma, cuts and bruises inconsistent with falls, faint signs of hypothermia from exposure to cold water, yet no explanation for the missing men. Witness statements describe moments of paralysis, limbs feeling heavy, as if an unseen force held them, tugged them, resisted escape. Logs describe panic spreading rapidly through patrols, men separated, radios unable to maintain contact, a sense of inevitability creeping into the consciousness of the soldiers. Even environmental sensors detected anomalies. Water levels in channels rose inexplicably, temperatures fluctuated, fog thickened unnaturally in patches, and motion detectors intended to track wildlife recorded movement, too precise, too deliberate, to be animals. Analysts later noted that these irregularities coincided with the times soldiers reported disappearances, lending an eerie credibility to their accounts. The swamp was behaving like an entity, reacting, responding, almost aware. Eyewitness statements provide chilling detail. One soldier recounted a moment when his comrade seemed to vanish mid-step. A scream cut short, and then silence. Water still. No disturbance. Nothing. Another spoke of seeing limbs beneath the water, reaching, grasping, and then nothing again, as if the swamp had swallowed evidence entirely. Logs are filled with hesitations, ellipses, dashes, scribbled fragments that suggest fear more than clarity. Orders from the higher command insisted on routine patrols, yet even these directives seemed hollow. The men hesitant, eyes constantly scanning, hands clenching weapons with trembling fingers. Footage from night vision cameras, grainy black and white, captured only vague outlines. Flashes of movement in the reeds, indistinct shapes that defy identification. Analysts reviewing the tapes later admitted they could not discount the possibility that something beyond ordinary explanation was involved. Perhaps most disturbing are the personal journals recovered months later. Entries speak of sensations of being pulled, of water gripping legs like iron chains, of whispers calling names, melodic, sorrowful, terrifying. One entry describes a comrade resisting, struggling, then disappearing with a splash that echoed for minutes, though no one approached in time to save him. Another notes hearing laughter, faint, echoing, under the fog. When the patrol was far from any village, far from any human presence, even mundane equipment betrayed the soldiers' senses. Compasses spun without reason. GPS units malfunctioned in ways inconsistent with radiation interference. Watches stopped, only to resume hours later. all aligning with moments of reported disturbance. The swamp, in its dense fog and dark water, became a living record of unexplained phenomena, each patrol adding entries to an invisible ledger, a ledger of fear, disappearance, and inexplicable forces. Every fragment of fact carries with it a sense of disbelief, of rational minds grappling with impossible events. Maps show clear terrain, yet the logs report vanishing pathways, soldiers reporting the sensation of treading water where the land should be solid, echoes of splashes from nowhere, footsteps that cannot be traced. The factual record does not fully explain what occurred, only affirms that something unusual, something dangerous, haunted the swamps of Pripyat that night. By the end of the patrol, the records converge on one undeniable truth: men disappeared, bodies never recovered, equipment left behind, voices lost to the fog. And yet each report corroborates the others in detail. The combination of environmental anomalies, eyewitness testimony, declassified memos, and personal journals paints a picture, chilling, undeniable, of a force in the swamp beyond normal comprehension, something patient, something waiting, something perhaps eternal. Long before the soldiers arrived, locals whispered of the Rusalka, a spirit bound to the waters, a being neither alive nor entirely dead, condemned to linger in the murky swamps of Pripyat. Mothers warned children not to wander near the reeds. Fishermen spoke of pale figures glimpsed beneath the surface, eyes glinting in the moonlight, hands reaching, dragging, claiming. Each story carried the same warning: the water does not forgive, the water remembers, the water waits. Tales told of her hair, long and black, floating across the surface, entwining reeds trailing across channels, a warning or an invitation none could say. Her voice, they said, could imitate the laughter of lost friends, the cries of loved ones, coaxing the living closer, enticing them into depths from which no one returned. Even experienced hunters avoided the swamp at night, convinced that what had claimed one man could claim another, and the Rusalka's patience was eternal. Legends described the moment of the touch, cold as ice, heavy as stone, pulling the unsuspecting under, into water dark enough to hide all traces. Some spoke of feeling their own limbs seize, a tug at ankle, calf, or wrist, and a sensation of being wrenched into darkness, never to surface again. The stories whispered by the old and repeated by the young matched the reports of soldiers, each echoing the other, blending reality and myth into a single chilling narrative. Elders told of songs carried on the fog, notes drifting across reeds, impossible melodies that seemed to rise from the depths themselves, calling names, twisting memories, and luring men toward their doom. One village account spoke of a fisherman who followed such a song, returning only to vanish later with his entire boat. No trace recovered, only the echo of a melody lingering in the mist. Soldiers began recognizing the pattern, the splashes, the whispers, the unseen tugging, as if the swamp itself rehearsed the legend night after night. Some stories claimed the Rusalka was a warning, a keeper of balance, punishing those who intruded upon sacred waters, a reflection of human trespass into places best left alone. Others insisted she was malevolent, a predator eternal, feeding on fear, weakness, and curiosity, dragging men into watery graves, leaving nothing behind but echoes and whispers. The soldiers could not dismiss either explanation, as each incident mirrored the old tales too precisely, too deliberately. Even the fog carried her presence, thickening when men approached certain channels, curling unnaturally over water, hiding shapes that shimmered like flesh, yet moved like shadow. Trees and reeds seemed to twist toward them, leaning, bending, as if guiding the patrol toward unseen edges, toward danger. Old folklore described this as the swamp marking its prey, a ritual repeated through generations, soldiers now caught unwittingly in its cycle. Night patrols became exercises in fear, every sound interpreted as a signal, every ripple a threat. Footsteps in water seemed to echo backward. Voices called from impossible distances, and the soldiers began murmuring the old names, repeating warnings they had once scoffed at, realizing too late that legend and experience were converging, merging into one unrelenting reality. One account speaks of a patrolman frozen mid-step, eyes fixed on a white figure emerging slowly from the reeds, hair like black water trailing, hands extended, calling, beckoning, a melody rising from lips unmoving, and then a sudden tug at the ankle, a flash of panic, and the patrolman's companions saw only the water ripple, empty. Such reports, though steeped in fear, bore uncanny similarity to village lore. The Rusalka described in hushed tones now manifest in terrifying detail. Stories from surrounding villages added layers, of drowned children whose spirits became Rusalka, of lovers lost in swamps and never found, of figures that mimicked familiar voices, of water that could entangle clothing boots, even rifles, pulling everything toward an unseen bottom, swallowing reality as surely as myth. Soldiers began documenting these tales, not as fiction, but as potential warnings, folklore merging with field reports, guiding their understanding of the dangers they faced. By the time dawn approached, the swamp had told its story, through whispers, splashes, and shadows, through memory and legend, weaving the factual disappearances with centuries of fear and myth. The soldiers were left with certainty of one truth. The Rusalka was no longer just a story. She was present, patient, waiting, in the murky waters, beneath the reeds, in the fog. A living reflection of every warning ever whispered by those who had come before. The swamp of Pripyat was not unique in its darkness. Across Eastern Europe, marshes, rivers, and isolated lakes held secrets whispered for generations. Tales of sudden vanishings, unexplained drownings, and haunting melodies. Soldiers began to notice a pattern. The motif repeated itself, disappearance, tugging whispers, unseen hands, and the fear became universal, a chilling thread connecting experiences across time and space. One patrolman recalled an old assignment in the north, a lake where fishermen vanished nightly. No bodies, only ripples, only whispers in the fog. Locals spoke of the Vodyanoi, a male counterpart to the Rusalka, dragging those who trespassed into watery graves, a predator born of folklore yet reflected in fact. The repetition of these events suggested a disturbing possibility, that human curiosity in such places invited danger, and that the supernatural or the forces we cannot comprehend was embedded in the landscape itself. Documents from archival sources revealed similar cases, military logs noting singular disappearances in remote swamps, local legends confirming tales of spirits and water-bound predators, a convergence of history, observation, and myth. Each report carried the same elements: a tug at the ankle, footsteps, vanishing calls in familiar voices, a melody drawing men toward danger, and no trace of the missing left behind. The soldiers' training offered no answers, only heightened awareness and creeping dread. Historical texts confirmed similar motifs, chronicles describing travelers lost to marshes, warnings of spirits or hands of the water in formal, cautious language. Yet the undercurrent of superstition emerged. Words like fate unknown, mysterious occurrence, singular disappearance reality and legend intertwined. The swamp became a nexus where fear, memory, and environment merged, where human perception bent under pressure, and the Rusalka's presence seemed plausible, almost inevitable. Across regions, Black Forest, Danube, Delta, Russian marshlands, similar stories emerged. Water claiming the unwary melodies calling from reeds, shadows moving against wind and current. Even rational observers admitted to feeling watched, tugged, drawn. Soldiers began mapping these connections, not to validate myth, but to understand recurrence, to trace invisible threads between fact and folklore, between what is seen and what is believed. One log captured a soldier muttering about a prior mission, a riverbank where comrades disappeared, splashes in shallow water, hands grasping at boots, and a melody that seemed alive, rising and falling, shaping perception, guiding movement, compelling action. Such recollections confirmed the motif. The swamp as agent water, as medium and spirit Rusalka Vodyanoi, or unnamed as active participant in a recurring drama. Folklore scholars later analyzed these events, drawing lines between regional myths and documented disappearances, concluding that the Rusalka motif, though culturally specific, reflected a universal human fear of isolation, water, and unseen forces. Soldiers realized Pripyat was a single chapter, part of a timeless narrative, where those who enter are tested and sometimes claimed, reinforcing a cycle of caution, legend, and terror. Equipment. Anomalies added to the mystery. Radios cutting out during disturbances, compasses spinning erratically, watches stopping. Patterns repeated in distant swamps with folklore attached. Observers began to see the phenomenon as more than fear or fatigue, a repeatable, consistent disturbance. A narrative written by the water itself, by forces known and unknown, echoing through history. Warning, observing, claiming. Personal accounts deepened the bridge. Men described being pulled almost imperceptibly into channels, glimpses of figures in mist, whispers of names, melodies rising from reeds, reflections of village tales now intertwined with first-hand experience. The motif was undeniable, repeated across distance and time, weaving factual experiences with centuries of folklore, a bridge connecting reality to legend, the living to the spirits of the drowned. By the early morning, patrols approached the swamp differently, not merely as terrain, but as a narrative landscape, shaped by history, memory, and unseen forces. Fact and myth intertwined. Footsteps recorded today echoed centuries-old warnings. The Rusalka's presence was part of a broader pattern, water disappearance observation, waiting for the next human misstep, a timeless motif of warning and consequence, where legends are born from reality, and reality is haunted by legend. By midnight, the swamp had transformed from an environment into a predator, each patrolman feeling the weight of eyes unseen, the water shifting beneath them, waiting. Private Ivanov's log describes the moment most chilling, a tug at his ankle, cold and unyielding, a hand emerging from black water, pulling him toward a channel too deep to see, yet too shallow to explain the sensation of being dragged. He screamed, the sound swallowed by mist, by reeds, by silence, and his comrades could only watch, paralyzed by fear and disbelief. Another soldier, Sergeant Petrov, reported seeing a figure standing just beyond the flashlight beam, pale as frost, hair floating like dark reeds across the surface, hands extended toward them. Yet when he shouted, it vanished, leaving only ripples, only the echo of a melody, a song that seemed impossibly alive, curling through the fog, guiding men toward unseen depths. His testimony conflicted with Ivanov's, but the pattern was consistent, men disappearing where none should, and the water holding them, refusing to release evidence. Declassified memos revealed discrepancies, reports of multiple soldiers vanishing simultaneously, some calling for help, some lost in silence, radios capturing only static, then distant splashes, impossible to locate. Patrol logs describe hesitation, panic, a sense of inevitability settling over the unit, as if the swamp itself dictated who would survive and who would be claimed. A choreography of fear that no training could counter. Personal journals recovered later detail moments of pure terror. An unseen tug at leg or wrist, a pause mid-step, and then weightless falling into darkness. Water enveloping them completely. Senses overwhelmed. Eyes straining through fog, and no body ever retrieved. Some entries are smudged, lines scratched out, words like fate unknown repeated, as if the authors could not bear to describe it fully, or feared that writing it down might summon it again. Footprints vanished abruptly, boots left in mud with no trace of the man, rifles abandoned on the bank, splashes rising where no one was. Night vision cameras, grainy and black and white, captured fleeting glimpses, a white shape gliding across water, a shadow in the reeds, then nothing, no explanation, just confirmation that something impossible had occurred. Analysts reviewing the footage noted that anomalies coincided precisely with the times soldiers disappeared, reinforcing the chilling intersection of fact and the unseen. One patrolman described a struggle in whispered tones, an ankle grabbed, a weight pulling him downward, his rifle slipping from hands clutched with panic. The sensation of being submerged, of water alive with intention. He clawed at the mud, at reeds, at empty air, before finally breaking free, shivering, trembling, unable to speak for hours. Other accounts mirror this, tugging, dragging sensations of hands beneath the surface, all in locations where the land appeared solid, ordinary, harmless. Even the environmental data seemed complicit. Sudden changes in water temperature, anomalies in fog density, compasses spinning, equipment failing, all aligning with the moments of disappearance. The swamp was not neutral. It responded. It influenced. It observed. An entity that defied conventional understanding, as if legend and reality had fused. The Rusalka now active, patient, calculating, waiting. By the early hours, patrols were fractured, some huddled in mud-covered reeds, eyes scanning, ears straining. Every ripple, every whisper, every distant splash feeding terror. Soldiers described seeing figures mimic familiar faces, voices calling their names, songs rising from depths, melodies that seemed to animate the water itself, drawing them forward, insisting, compelling, claiming. Rational thought was swallowed by instinct. Fear. The undeniable sense that the swamp had chosen its prey. Amid this chaos, journals and logs reveal contradictions, testimonies that cannot coexist, men describing the same event differently, yet the core remains the same presence, pulling, disappearance, echoes in water, shadows that defy identification. Facts and folklore converge, creating a high tide of suspense, a climax that overwhelms logic and immerses the audience in a world where the Rusalka exists and waits patiently for the next intrusion. As the night reached its peak, the swamp released a final harrowing tableau, ripples spreading from nothing, voices cut off mid-cry, splashes vanishing as if swallowed by the black water. and the remaining soldiers left with certainty of one truth, that in Pripyat, at the edge of the abandoned city, the swamp holds its own memory. It remembers, it claims, and it never forgets. The Rusalka is real, patient, eternal, and the night has only just begun. As dawn broke over Pripyat, the fog began to lift slowly. Yet the swamp retained its presence, thick, heavy watching, as if aware of every movement from the night before. Soldiers emerged, boots caked in mud, hands trembling, silent, carrying memories that words could scarcely describe. Shadows burned into their minds, each ripple of water a reminder of what had occurred and what had been claimed. Logs and journals left behind were fragmented. Entries, smudged lines crossed out, words trailing into ellipses, as though the authors feared finishing their thoughts might summon the unseen or invite it closer. Even those who returned could not explain the sensation, the tugging at ankles, the whispers on the wind, the melodies rising from reeds, the glimpses of pale shapes that dissolved before comprehension. The swamp kept its secrets, yet left traces of terror in those who survived. Local villagers still tell tales of the Rusalka, of the night patrols that vanish, of shapes gliding across fogged waters, of distant ripples where no human should tread, and songs that call names, coaxing the living toward danger. Some claim she waits patiently for the reckless, for the curious, for those who ignore warnings. A sentinel of the swamp, a spirit intertwined with water, fog, and silence, watching, always watching, and testing the unwary. The question persists, were these events real, or were they a product of fear, isolation, and exhaustion? Did the soldiers' eyes deceive them, or did they witness something beyond comprehension? A presence older than the city itself, entwined with legend and fact, patient, eternal, waiting just beneath the surface of the water, ready to claim the next intruder. Even today, when silence falls over the swamp, when reeds sway in the cold wind, when fog curls across stagnant water, the waters seem alive, listening, remembering. Every ripple, every whisper, every shadow may be a warning or a lure. Patrols still enter cautiously, senses heightened, knowing that the swamp itself might judge missteps, punish hesitation, and remind them that some forces are not meant to be understood. The soldiers' experiences serve as a chilling lesson that curiosity can be dangerous, that the unknown may not forgive, and that places abandoned by man are often inhabited by something else, something patient, something that moves in silence, that watches from beneath the reeds, that waits and waits until the next mistake is made. Legends like the Rusalka endure because they carry truth, fragments of human memory, echoes of fear and experience, and a warning the swamp does not forget. It remembers, it claims, it repeats. And even rational minds faced with these events cannot deny the uncanny consistency of disappearances, the impossible movements in water, the melodies that defy explanation, blending folklore with undeniable reality. As the morning sun struggled to pierce the mist, soldiers looked upon the swamp differently, not merely as terrain, but as a living narrative. A place shaped by history, memory, and unseen forces, where fact and legend intertwine, where each step may echo centuries of warnings, and where the presence of the Rusalka is undeniable, patient, eternal, watching for those who tread too close. The swamp of Pripyat whispers still, to anyone who dares to listen. A story of men claimed by water, of shadows and whispers, of melodies rising through reeds, of a presence older than the city waiting, observing, testing, reminding all who enter that some places belong not to the living, and that some forces never let go. You have just witnessed another account from Shadow Stories, a tale of disappearance legend and the blurred line between fact and folklore. If you wish to uncover more hidden truths, to step carefully into forgotten places, and to hear the echoes that linger in the night, subscribe, and remember, the shadows are always watching, the water never forgets, and some stories do not end. They only pause, waiting for the next step into the mist, the next hand in the water, the next heartbeat drawn into legend.